Good evening, everyone. My name is Alyssa Ricky. Welcome to the third webinar in our series about UFLI Foundation's implementation. Tonight's webinar will focus on implementing day 2, so steps 5 through 8. This webinar is being recorded and it will be available after the fact on the UFLI YouTube channel. Before we start, just a few logistics. If you have any questions about the manuals, awaiting your manual, shipping, all that kind of stuff, if you have any questions about that, please contact our publisher, Ventress Learning. Their contact information can be found on our website as well. Second, if you have any questions for our panelists today, please put them in the Q&A box instead of the chat feature. Sometimes in the chat, it can get a little bit lost, and our team that's amazing behind the scenes, it's easier for them to answer it to you inside of the Q&A feature instead of the chat. At the end, if we have some time, we'll do some live questions. And if any of your questions aren't answered, feel free to add them onto our Facebook group. But without any further ado, let's welcome the authors of UFLI Foundation's program and our hosts for tonight, Dr. Holly Lane and Dr. Valentina Contess. Welcome, ladies, again. So excited to be here.
Thank you, Allie. We appreciate it. And let's get started. So welcome, everyone. We wanted to remind you that we do have the other webinars now posted, and we will continue to get these webinars posted as soon after they're done as we can. It usually takes at least 24 hours for us to get the captioning corrected and the video processed. So we will hope to get it up sometime tomorrow and continue as we get through this series. So hopefully this is helping you prepare to implement lessons on your own. So we are going to be focusing on the implementation section of the manual. This is where you can find the scope and sequence, but in particular, how to teach the lessons, how to prepare to do it, and then how to do each of the steps. So the webinar that we did on Monday, we went through the day 1 steps, and today we're focusing on the next part. But this section has really all of the materials that you need to learn how to do this. And hopefully the explanations that you're getting in these webinars is enhancing your understanding. So as a quick review, the core UFLI Foundation's lessons include these 8 steps. And when I say the core lessons, I'm talking about the lessons that are listed out on the scope and sequence. So the concepts 1 through 128, there are actually 138 of those core lessons, and most of them follow this same lesson sequence. There are some slight variations based on the content of the particular lesson, but this basic sequence is how the vast majority of the lessons go. So the first 4 steps are the warm up and review. And then in step 5, this is when the new concept is introduced. And so those first 5 steps are the day 1 piece of this. And then on day 2, we start back on the new concept with a quick review. And then we go through application of the new concept in doing word work. We also introduce any irregular words that are needed at that point in the scope and sequence. And then the majority of the lesson is focused on reading and writing connected text. So we're going to take you through the day 2 parts. So as you probably know by now, the lesson implementation is suggested to be divided so that you do those 2 sections. So over the course of a week, you would do 2 full lessons, half of the first one on Monday, the second half on Tuesday, and so forth. Friday is focused on review of those concepts and also the progress monitoring assessment. We're going to be having another webinar very soon that will focus on that review and assessment day. So this is really helping us get through what is normally going to probably be happening for you on Tuesdays and Thursdays. So the day 2 of the lesson. So we have been focused on lesson 45 is kind of our example because it is pretty much in the middle of the scope and sequence. So it looks a lot like lessons that happen in kindergarten, first and second grade. And so our focus is going to be starting on step 5, the new concept. We will also talk about step 6, the word work, step 7, irregular words, and then step 8, the connected text. So those are the steps that we'll dive into tonight. So on your slide deck, you see about halfway through most of the slide decks, you'll see a day 2 opening slide. And that's where you would begin with your day 2 slides. And then the slides there will accompany your step 5, 6, 7, and 8. So if you look at the times there for this second day, the review for the new concept is pretty quick. You spend a lot of time on day 1 introducing the new concept and practicing the skill. And on day 2, the review is just to remind students to activate their prior knowledge about that new concept. And then you dive right into applying it with word work. And the word work is really probably one of the most important pieces of this, the practice that you get in word work. So when we get to step 6, pay extra close attention because in my opinion, that's the most important step in all of this. And then you'll do the irregular words. And then the bulk of the day 2 lesson is spent reading and writing connected text. So kids read sentences, they write sentences, and then they read a decodable passage. So here's the opening slide for your day 2 lesson, and then you'll have your day 2 schedule. And so the visual schedule is built in as both a cue for the teacher and for the students. And the students really like seeing each of these checked off. So as you finish a particular step, you see the check mark appear in the box. And I've been in some classrooms in our pilot district where kids got to the end of a step and they would cheer themselves. They were very excited. So make a big deal about kids accomplishing each step each day. And they end up loving this routine and being able to know exactly what they're supposed to do. They understand the activities really well. So that means they can focus their learning on the concept. They don't have to figure out a new activity every day. So it was kind of amusing to me in our pilot district that some of the teachers up front were really concerned. It's the same basic routine every single day. Won't that get old? But by the end of the year, both the teachers and the students said that one of their favorite aspects of these lessons was the very predictable routine. And I do think having a day 1 and a day 2 that aren't exactly the same actually helps too. So there is some variation from day 1 to day 2, but over the course of all of the lessons, the basic structure stays the same. And teachers and kids really appreciated that. So we're going to go through each of these steps, starting with the new concept review, which is a really brief piece. So this should take approximately 3 minutes, and all you need for this as the teacher is the lesson slides. And the students don't really need anything for this. They're just looking at the slides that you're projecting for this part. So to do this, you have parts of what you included in your new concept introduction. So you're explaining what the concept is. You're always focused with a new grapheme. You're sharing with your students where in a word that particular grapheme can appear. Can it appear in the initial, medial, and final position, or is it limited to just one of those, or what? A quick review of the articulatory gesture, and then a very brief guided practice. So the let's read together is always a cue that you're going to do that with your students, guiding them through those words. So additional practice applying the concept that they just learned the day before. So for this new concept review, you're focusing on the grapheme phoneme correspondence, the grapheme placement, and the articulatory gesture, and then providing that guided practice, reading words containing that new concept. So all of that really only takes about 3 minutes. And think of it as you're activating your students' prior knowledge. One thing I want to mention is that we don't expect kids to necessarily fully master a concept in the 2-day lesson. We have built in additional review of concepts throughout the subsequent lessons. So if you look at lesson 45 and SH being practiced there, and then go look at lesson 46 and 47 and 48, you'll see a lot more SH practice. So the idea there is that interleaved practice, they're still learning new concepts, but still practicing the previously taught ones, really helps ensure that kids over time get all of these concepts mastered. So if you do your assessment on Friday and find some kids that are not quite there yet, that all that says is they're going to probably need even more review than is already built into the lessons. And I'm going to pass it over to Valentina now to take us through steps 6 and 7.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight. Thanks, Holly. So once students have reviewed the new concepts from the previous day, once again, day 2 really targets the application of this new skill through word work with regular words. So for the word work step with regular words, you have some options. You can either use the UFLI word work mat apps on the screen, or students can use individual manipulative letters, so magnetic letters or grapheme tiles. This step should take approximately 6 minutes. So this step is one that really promotes students' development of orthographic mapping. And so we're helping students get a lot of practice, both encoding and decoding words in order to help them orthographically map these words like we see here in the pictures. So when students are trying to encode a word, they have to think about the word, like the word frog, think of the individual sounds, and then match those sounds to the letters that represent those sounds. Students, in order to decode, do the opposite. They see the letters of the word frog. They say the individual sounds to get to the whole word frog. The same process students do with words with more complex graphemes, like we see here with the example of the word fish. So in the lessons, like you see here on the left, the word work step targets that new concept. And so you'll see here, because the new concept was SH, this word chain for word work targets that SH. You can see SH at the beginning of words in this word chain and at the end of words. Once again, all of the words in this word chain for this step are regular words, so words that can be decodable for students. Once again, you are either using the UFLI word work mat app or individual manipulative letters or tiles to guide students through this word work activity. The slide for this step on the slide deck simply just gives you an idea of what materials you might be using. So something like the word work mat app that you see here. Some of the lessons do prompt you to use a whiteboard in order to engage your students with this step. And we'll talk a little bit more about this in just a minute. So I've mentioned the term word chain. So a word chain is can be used to help students practice both decoding and encoding. And this can be done at different levels of difficulty. So onset rhyme level word chains, like you see here with mad, sad, fad, pad, tad, had, and bad, these only change the onset of the word. So these are word family types of word chains, which are the least complex. Phoneme level word chains change different parts of the word. So the change can be in the initial placement and the medial placement or the final placement. Like we see here going from mat to sat to hat. That was the initial placement change. From hat to had, that changes in the final placement. Had, bad, tad, tap, and then also adding something at the end, like from tab to taps. These types of word chains can also target more complex graphemes like SH, like we see here with this onset rhyme level word chain targeting SH and the ash rhyme. So here we see ash to bash to cash to dash, lash, clash to crash. So the ASH, so ash rhyme stays the same throughout that word chain, which is less difficult than this phoneme level word chain that we see targeting SH, which once again, it changes from SH being in the initial placement and the final placement, and also brings in other concepts like we see here with shot and shock and sock. So once again, onset rhyme level word chains are less difficult than phoneme level word chains for students to engage with. In the lessons, the second page of each lesson has multiple word chains listed, like you see here. The one listed at the bottom, like you see here that says phoneme level intro lesson, this last word chain is the one in the lesson for this step. But in addition to that word chain, you also have additional word chains that you can use in order to differentiate instruction for your whole group class or for small group. So you can see here, there's 2 onset rhyme level word chains, these first 2 ones, and then there are additional phoneme level word chains that target SH, but this first one only targets SH in the initial placement, and then this 4th word chain here targets SH in the final placement. So once again, these are provided for you in order to make decisions about which word chain to use in order to best meet your students' needs. However, the goal is to practice this new concept. Like you see here with all these word chains, they all target SH. So in word work step, the goal is to provide students with both encoding practice and decoding practice. So encoding, we're helping students spell words, and for decoding, we're helping them read words. So how students practice these 2 skills is dependent on the prompts that we provide them through our instruction. So when we say things like change sat to hat, the student is looking at the word sat that they have in front of them, and they're having to think about how to spell this new word hat. So they would need to know that they needed to change the S to an H in order to spell or encode this new word hat. Same thing when we say things like, what letter do we need to change sat to hat? Students have to think about that change in sound in order to spell this new word hat. Another example is, what would we have to do to change cat into cast? The student would have to think about that additional sound in order to spell this new word. For decoding practice, this is where we're asking students to change something in the word that they have and prompt them to read this new word. For example, if they have the word sat once again, and we say change the S in sat to an H, what word do we have? The student would change that S into an H, and they would be practicing reading this new word. That example had students attend to letter names in the directions. You can also do this with letter sounds. So instead of saying change the S to an H, you can say change the S in sat to a read your new word. So this is a little bit more difficult because students have to connect that sound now to the letter that they need in order to make this change and read the new word. You can also make the change for the students, like this example. If I put an S right here in cat, what word does that spell? And the students would read this new word. Once again, the type of practice students engage in during word work depends on what we provide as a prompt. And we want to make sure that we're providing both encoding prompts and decoding prompts so that students get both types of practice. Here's another sample of this kind of alternating between encoding and decoding prompts. So going from having students spell new words or encode new words or build words that they're reading or decoding. We find it easiest to alternate between encoding and decoding, so switching back and forth. This is a great method to use, especially if you're getting used to providing both types of prompts, but it doesn't have to be every other change like this. But if you're first starting off doing these kinds of prompts for word work, it is really helpful to think about it in that way. So we're going to look here at an example of a word chain and how students would be manipulating individual tiles, grapheme tiles, in order to engage in word work. And again, with the focus being both decoding and encoding of words that target this new concept SH. So I would say, make the word shin, and students would take their tiles and move and say sounds sh, n. So because I said make the word, this is an example of the encoding type of practice. So now students have the word shin in front of them. And I say, change the n to a p. What word is this? So they change the n to a p. And I said, what word is this? So this is a decoding practice for them because they're having to read this new word that they built. Now the students are looking at the word ship, and I say change ship to shop. So the student has to think, what's different? Ship, shop. Oh, they need to change the I to the ah in order to spell that new word. So they're practicing encoding. Now they have the word shop, and I say change the P to a CK. So they do that, they change the P to a CK. And the teacher says, what word did we spell? And the students read this new word, sh-a-k. So they're practicing decoding. Something to point out is for a change like shop to shock, I chose to say change P to CK instead of saying change the P to a K, because what we know about the sound K is that it has multiple spellings. And of course, it's okay to address student errors if a student were to put a C or a K at the end. However, because this targeted practice is intended to really focus on that SH concept and students practicing decoding and encoding with that new concept, I was proactive and just chose to say change it to CK so that they would all be able to read this word correctly. Again, to focus on that new concept SH. So as you can see with this example, I chose to alternate between encoding and decoding in order to provide my students both types of practice. Here's a quick clip of students spelling their initial word. Play the sound. I love that I'm hearing friends say sounds. What letter says I? Very good job. What letter says I? Good job. And then last sound is So as you could see in the video, a big goal of this step when students are spelling and reading words, so encoding or decoding words, is that they're using the sounds. So lots of prompts to say the sounds in order to spell that new word. In this video, students were using our UFLI printable word work mat, which was my colleagues will link in the chat in just a minute. So this is just manipulative tiles that are used with Velcro. So that's just one type of material that can be used for this step. And this quick other video, you'll see students now decoding a word. So reading a word that they have built. Shop. Such good reading, friends. So very quick clip, but to model the importance of students segmenting and blending when we're asking them to decode in the step. Once again, this is their first application, more independent application of the new concept. So it's really important to promote that segmentation and blending in order to decode these words. Another thing you can see here in the image of the video is that these students just have the alphabet and then this new SH grapheme. And so it's helpful if you do use this tool to add the graphemes as students learn them. Kids love to see their board building up as they learn new graphemes, and it also doesn't overwhelm them from the beginning of the year when they haven't learned those grapheme phoneme correspondences quite yet. Here's another video of students using magnetic letters. So a lot of our teachers in our pilot schools use magnetic letters on a magnetic board. These are burner covers. One of the things we suggested that teachers use in order to use magnetic letters more efficiently for word work is putting an alphabet map behind the letters so that students know where to return the letters and where to pick letters from. So as you can see, the letters are in alphabetical order and students have space down here to build it, like you see in the picture as well. We do strongly suggest that if you are using magnetic letters, that you do have some form of alphabet map so that students, once again, know where to return letters to and where to get letters from in order to make the practice more efficient. It also really helps with students learning alphabetical order. So here's a quick video of students using the magnetic letters. So you saw in the video, students had the word tag and they were building the new word bag, and they knew exactly where to return the T to and get the B magnetic letter from. Another thing you'll notice in the video is that the students, as soon as they were done building this new word bag, they put their thumbs up. So you didn't hear the teacher say that because they've been so used to this type of procedure that they knew to do that. It's really helpful to have procedures or routines like this so that, once again, we've been talking a lot about the importance of choral responses. So you seeing that all students have completed building this new word allows you to know that now you can prompt them to read this new word. Another thing we've seen teachers say or do is having students touch underneath the first letter to show them that they're ready to read. And once most students are ready, saying, okay, let's read the word together, bag. So once again, all of these types of routines or procedures are in efforts to promote as many opportunities to respond of all students through choral responses. In your manual on page 30, there is another sample script for word work, once again, with the goal of providing students both encoding and decoding types of practice with the word chains that are provided in the lessons. In later lessons, there are word work activities that instead of using manipulative letters require different types of materials. So you can see here for this lesson, it says word work with writing, and that is because this word chain utilizes double letters. So for this type of word chain, you would simply use a whiteboard with your students, any form of whiteboard that you have available. There are some notes sometimes with the lessons, and so this word chain, it does use manipulative letters, but you see here the asterisk to point out that because this lesson is about open and closed syllables, it says have students explain or discuss whether each word is an open or closed syllable. So something to look out for in the lessons. There are other lessons that have different types of directions. So this is the lesson that focuses on students learning to read two syllables first with compound words, like you see here with the example stepmom and pinball. And so for these, students would be reading each individual syllable and then blending the syllables together. And so these activities say, see lesson slide deck for visual aids. That means in your slide deck, in your slides, you have the visuals that you need in order to engage your students with this word work practice. Here's another example. This one says word sort. So this is a lesson much later in the scope and sequence that focuses on prefixes, as you see here with un, pre, and re. And so this activity engages students in using the prefixes to sort the words and also discuss definitions of each word. And once again, this one says, see lesson slide deck for graphic organizer. So here's an image of, once again, an example of these types of activities that have visuals built into the slide decks. So to review, step 6, word work should take approximately 6 minutes. Once students learn the routines of using the materials, it is really an efficient step where students can get a lot of practice in. The word chains usually include about 14 words. Our goal, especially at the beginning of the year, would be to at least get to 10 words from these word chains. Again, this is a really important step of the lesson because they are applying this new concept, again, with both encoding and decoding. So shoot for at least 10 of the words in the word chain. But of course, if you can fit the entire word chain within the 6 minutes, that's even better. And then again, to review, it's really important that the type of prompts we provide allow students to practice both encoding and decoding. And encoding prompts are where students are seeing a word and we say change that word to a different word, like we see here with change sat to hat. They're having to encode or spell this new word versus decoding prompts where we're asking them to change parts of the words in order to read new words, like we see here with change the S in sat to an H. What word do we have? And just another reminder that this is a step where you have flexibility of what material to use. You can use WordWork, mat apps, physical WordWorks, like you saw in some of the videos with the Velcro mats, or magnetic letters or tiles. For irregular words, this is another step that helps students apply concepts. So they're reading and spelling irregular words now. For this step, you will be utilizing the lesson slides that have the visuals here to support your instruction, which we'll talk about in just a minute. And students will need something to write with, so some sort of writing utensil and surface. This step should also take approximately 6 minutes. And again, students are practicing both reading and spelling irregular words. In this step, there are sometimes different types of irregular words. So irregular words can either be permanently irregular, like we see here with the examples one, shoe, I, and who. These are words that no matter where students are on the scope and sequence, they'll always have some sort of grapheme phoning correspondence that's unique to that word or a few words. So again, words that will always be irregular for students. Words can also be temporarily irregular, which means that the word has some sort of grapheme phoning correspondence that the student just hasn't learned yet based on where they are in the scope and sequence. So if we look at the example is, this word is temporarily irregular because at the point that it's taught in the lesson, students haven't learned that the S says Z yet, but eventually they do learn that, so it is no longer irregular. Same with the word go. Students learn it as irregular first because they have not learned about open syllables and that the O can make its long vowel sound. But eventually, when students do learn that concept, go becomes a regular word for them, a word that they can fully decode. Just like with WordWork, the goal of this step in our program is to focus on orthographic mapping of these words. So in many programs and in many instructional practices, we typically teach irregular words or high frequency words as memorizing these words. So look at this word, this is the word said, memorize this word. But in order to promote orthographic mapping, we do want to use the sounds that are not irregular in the word for students to attend to. So when students are decoding or reading the word said, in the word said, the S and the D make their most common sounds. So that part of the word is not irregular. The only part in said that is irregular is that AI, which doesn't make its most common sound. So when students go to read this word, they have to remember that when they see that AI, it's going to say and that's the irregular part. So they read said, they know the sound S. They have to look at AI and say, oh, I remember that says S, ed, said, in order to get to the complete word. This can be done with more complex irregular words like we see here with the word people. So if students were decoding this word, most of the parts in the word people are regular. They're decodable for students. Students learn the sound for P and the sound for LE saying O. So the only part that's irregular in this word is the EO. So when students go to read or decode this word, that's the part they have to remember that is irregular when they sound up people. So in the lessons, it will typically have both review words and teach words. So most lessons have you practice words that have already been introduced and you're reviewing them now, and typically have words that you're teaching for the first time. Some of the words will have asterisks next to them, and that means that these are temporarily irregular words based on where students are in the scope and sequence and what lesson you're on. So we can see here that go and no, again, are temporarily irregular words. And we want to make sure that during both review and teaching of new words, we're providing students with both reading and spelling practice, focusing on those sounds in order to promote orthographic mapping of these words. So we do this with the method of talking about the part that we have to learn by heart. So the heart word method. So in the word your, you can see that there are blue boxes under the Y and the R because those two letters make their typical grapheme phoneme correspondences. Those are common sounds. You'll see that the O and the U have the heart underneath it because this is the part that's irregular and that we need to discuss with students, that is tricky and that we should be learning by heart in order to read this word. But once again, we don't want to just show them this word and say, this is the word your, okay, let's memorize this word. We want to be intentional about discussing the sounds of this word, including the sounds for this irregular part, the OU. Again, the lessons will prompt you to read review words and spell review words and then teach new words. So you'll see here in the slide decks, there are slides to break that apart. So you'll see a review slide and then the review words. Then let's spell together to practice spelling those review words, and then a slide that says teach, and then the two words that match the teach words on the lesson plan. It's small and we'll see a closer look, but all of the teach slides, so again, for new irregular words, have an orange star in the top corner in order to remind you that these are words that are new and require more explicit instruction and practice. It's very important that in this step, you have the slides in editing mode because there are a few different features on these slides that are helpful for your instruction. The first is that in the notes, it will always very clearly state why that part that's with the heart is irregular. And sometimes it's dependent on dialect, like you see here with the word your. Another key element of the slides is that they have this white box, which can be used in order to cover up the symbols and uncover the symbols as you're introducing the word and teaching the word and practicing, once again, what parts are irregular in this word. Once again, words like your are permanently irregular. So these are words that no matter where on the scope students are, no matter what phoneme grapheme correspondences you've taught, these will always be irregular versus temporarily irregular words, which are only irregular at this point for students based on the concepts they've learned, based on the place that you are on for the scope and sequence. The word go is taught as a irregular word, but once students, once again, learn about open syllables and that vowels can make a long vowel sound or their name, this word becomes fully regular or decodable for students. Once again, as I mentioned, the teach words and slides have this orange star in the corner in order to remind us that these are new words that need really explicit instruction. So for this word she, again, pointing out that the SH, they just learned that concept and that makes its typical sound. The part that we have to learn by heart that's tricky is that we've been practicing E as saying but in this word, it says E, it says its sound. So this word is sh-e, she. What's the part we have to learn by heart? The E. And once again, this white box allows you to uncover symbols and cover them up in order to practice reading this word with the symbols and without the symbols. For spelling, it's really important, of course, that we always practice spelling the new words that we taught. So in this lesson, those words would be she and we. and recently learned words. So words that have been taught in the last lesson and the lesson before that, because it's very likely that students will continue to need practice with it. You also want to practice spelling any of those review words that you know that your students haven't mastered yet. So this is a part that requires your progress monitoring of your students to know which words they need additional practice spelling with. For example, the word want in my class in first grade, students always spelled this with a U for a long time. And so this would be a word that I would choose to continue reviewing because it just took my students longer to master it. We also wanted to mention that in addition to this explicit introduction and reading and spelling practice in step 7, the irregular words are also embedded into the sentences in step 8, the connected text step. So students are not just practicing these words in isolation, but also practicing them within context. Again, both reading sentences and spelling sentences. So to review, the irregular word step should take approximately 6 minutes. The step usually includes both review and teaching of new irregular words. Once again, sometimes the words are permanently irregular words and sometimes they're temporarily irregular words. And it's really important that we practice both reading and spelling these words, focusing on sounds so that we're helping students orthographically map these words and not just showing them and having them memorize these words. And now I will let Holly have control of the screen again in order to finish up with step 8.
Thanks, Val. And so we are on the last step now, the connected text step. So this is the kind of what everything leads up to get kids ready to be able to read and write connected text. That's the reason that we want children to be able to read words. So in order to do this, we are going to need some materials. So mostly what you'll need here is the lesson slides. And then for the students, they're going to need something to write on, something to write with, as with many of the steps. And you can also have downloaded from the toolbox, the UFLI toolbox, copies of the decodable passage or text. So those passages are embedded in the slides, and you can also have a printable copy. So you can do work with that in class, or you could also send home those decodable texts. Right. So the first part of step 8, connected text, is reading. And so you're reading sentences. So for this step, what you're going to be doing is guiding your students in reading these sentences. So this is all guided practice. And there are usually 3 sentences to read and 3 sentences to spell. So we recommend reading with your students all 3 sentences, and then spelling as many as you can. So at least 1, preferably 2, and if you can fit it in, 3. So the sentences for the connected text are on the slides, and you're going to guide your students through that. We'll demonstrate in a few minutes how that guided work can go. One way to do this is through choral reading. And this way, if you are choral reading and helping your students all come in at as close to the same time as possible, this really scaffolds students through the process of helping make sure that they're identifying each word and really focusing on each word one at a time. And for students who are struggling at all, the process that we use for choral reading, where you go back and reread what they've read so far, really helps build important habits. So if you have kids who are struggling to decode through a word, when they get to the end of the sentence, they really have no idea what the sentence said. It was just attempting to figure out one word. Okay, I've got that one. Let me figure out the next word. Got that one. Let me figure out the next one. But if you build the habit of going back to the beginning and read what you have so far, you are really emphasizing connecting the words to get meaning, which is ultimately what we want kids to be doing. So here's an example of this, and Valentina is going to be my student for this. So if you see the sentence over here, the dog can see the cat. If this is the sentence up on the slide, this shows the T is what the teacher might say, and the S is what the students might say. So, all right, kids, are we ready?
Yeah.
Okay, what word?
The.
Good job. What word?
Dog.
Good sounding out. What do we have so far?
The dog.
What word?
Can.
What word?
See.
Good job. Read what you have so far.
The dog can see.
What word?
The.
What word?
Cat.
Good job sounding out that word. What word? What do you have all together now?
The dog can see the cat.
Great reading. So that process of taking kids through just a little bit at a time, and if you think about how many times she just read each of those words, that's so many more opportunities to respond, but at the same time, it's maintaining the sentential level of meaning. It's not just attending to each word, it's that these words are connected in text and that they mean something when they're together. So you will see on the slides, the cue, whenever it says, let's do whatever, let's read together, let's spell together, that means that it's guided practice. So you're not just expecting the students to do it on their own, you're guiding them through the process. So that's a good way to take them through orally reading what's on the slide. For spelling, you'll also see a let's spell together. So this is not just a dictation that you want students to do on their own. It's not a test at this point. We do include dictation on the spelling measures, the progress monitoring measures that we'll talk about in the next webinar. But for this, you are dictating a sentence, but then you're guiding your students in spelling each word. So the idea here is that you will try to get through as many of the sentences as you can, at least one sentence, but try to get through at least two if you can. And the idea here is you're going to take them through the sentences very much like you just did in reading. So using some of the same strategies that you use in the day one. So you're going to be doing Elkonin boxes if needed, pound and sound if needed, and guiding them through the reading or the spelling of each word in the sentence. So this is a picture of a teacher who is helping her students. So the idea is that they figured out how to spell each word. And once they figured it out together, the kids are writing it on their paper, she's writing it on the board. A great strategy that this particular teacher used was to make boxes that represented the number of words in the sentence. So that helps kids keep track of, did they get, so when kids are writing their own sentences, they're coming up with what they want to say. If they have a way to think through what they're going to say and make some sort of a box or a line that they can tally or check off as they go, that eliminates a very common problem with young writers, is that their brains work faster than their hands do. And so they might think they've written words and you're trying to read their sentence and it makes no sense because they've left out words. So keeping track as they go of which words they've written is a way to help them. And that's a good model, a good strategy to model for them. So you would help them read the word, you're going to spell the word, you're going to have them go back and read what they have written and go through the sentence one word at a time, but you're guiding them through this process, not just expecting them to do it on their own. One of the other strategies that we use is the CAPS mnemonic, and this is just a strategy to support students in doing their own error monitoring. So once they've finished writing a sentence, we just very quickly encourage them to go through and look through the sentence 4 times. The first time they check, did they capitalize the first letter and the any names that were in the sentence? They look overall, is their sentence legible? Is it written neatly? Do they have bigger spaces between words than between individual letters and so forth? Did they punctuate? Usually there's at least punctuation just at the end, but there may be a comma or quotation mark in some of the later sentences. And then, of course, the most important thing is they're checking their spelling. Did they spell every word correctly? So the CAPS mnemonic is just a strategy to help support kids in checking their own work. And these are, again, good habits to build in young writers. So the last part of the connected text step is to actually read a passage or a book or a combination of these things. And so we have a decodable text guide. We are actually going to be probably posting that tomorrow. It's just about ready to share with you. And the decodable text guide includes links to the decodable passages. The decodable passages are also all linked in the toolbox in the lesson material. So with the same place you go to for the slide decks, right next to that is a decodable text that you can download. These are our passages, and these are written very carefully aligned with our scope and sequence. So each one of these passages includes lots of examples of the target concept, but it also includes practice of previously learned concepts. And even that is very carefully designed. So the most recently taught concepts appear more in most of the passages than ones taught 15 lessons ago. So the kids are still practicing a lot the things that they need. So this is part of the design of these lessons, is to have as much interleaved practice as we can so that kids keep coming back to the concepts that they've recently learned. So the actual decodable text passage is built into the slides. So during the lesson, you can have kids read directly off the slides, doing the choral reading back and forth, just like Valentina and I demonstrated. You can have them read from their printed passage, or you can have them do both. Read together on the slides and then read independently or with a partner with their passage at their seats. You can also have them take the passages home to practice more reading at home. The decodable text guide is going to be a Google sheet that you can, or yes, these are Google Sheets, sorry, Google Slides, Google Docs, I can't get them all confused. We have a Google Sheet that you can access to be able to look at other sources besides just the UFLI Foundation's decodables. Those are all listed, and those are linked to the decodable passage on our website. But we have other well-known series, and if you kept scrolling, you would see additional ones, and we plan to keep adding additional ones. So these are ones that we have access to. We plan to add other ones as we get access to more sets. So this is a place that you can go if you have one of these series, you have access to some of these books. You can go here and see where are particular titles in your set that you have aligned with our scope and sequence. So this, if the decodable series has their own scope and sequence, it may not align exactly. So we figured out where kids have enough skills already developed in order to read a particular passage. So these are not as perfectly aligned with the scope and sequence as our own passages are, because ours were designed specifically for these lessons, but it's great if you've got these to use them for additional practice. So my own recommendation would be to start them on the decodable passage from the UFLI set, and then use the other resources that you have to give kids added practice, more opportunities to practice the skills that they're learning. So here's a little bit closer up look at the decodable text guide. And you can see the very first lessons, kids aren't really reading much in the way of words to begin with in those very, very early lessons. But as soon as they do start combining sounds into words, there tend to be quite a few options. And as you go further in the scope and sequence, there are even more. So keep in mind, as you are guiding students in reading decodable text, that you want to make sure that you are supporting them and scaffolding them as much as they need, but not any more than they need. So thinking about a gradual release of responsibility, there are different types of strategies that provide different levels of scaffolding. And so the three that we recommend that you consider: echo reading, partner reading, and choral reading. So echo reading is simply an I read and then you read sequence. So you're going to model the accurate reading of a particular line of the text, and the students repeat after you. So this is the most scaffolding that you could possibly do. And if your kids don't need it, then you won't want to provide this. But if you've got kids who are really struggling, this will provide them with some success, and it'll allow you to get through the passage. So one opportunity that you might do is start out a passage with echo reading, let kids get to feel successful, and then shift into choral reading that requires them to do a lot more of the work. In partner reading, you're going to pair students to read the same text aloud, and generally you'll have them take turns. So one of the things that is helpful to think about here is you can pair a more capable reader with a less capable reader. And in that case, the more capable reader can actually provide a model. And if they are able, they might even be able to provide support and feedback for their peer who may not know as much. So one thing you want to be careful about is when you're assigning partners, you want to make sure that you're not assigning kids who are too far apart. So in this example of ORF scores for oral reading fluency scores for a list of students in a class, you can see there's a huge gap between the top student and the bottom student. So you would never want to pair those two students. But one way to pair students for activities like this is to take your whole class roster and split it in half. And then you would pair the bottom student of the top half with the bottom student of the bottom half. And you would then pair the top student of the top half with this top student of the bottom half. And then you don't have quite as big of a gap. And the students are able to work together more readily. So the last one we've already talked about a little bit, the idea of choral reading. And in this method, students are all reading the same text at the same time. And you can do this in whole class or one small group at a time. But the idea of choral reading is that this maximizes the number of words that each child reads, the amount of reading that they get to accomplish in a lesson. The more text that they read, the better they're going to get at reading. So we want to provide as much practice as we possibly can. And for kids who are struggling, sometimes they will get into a rhythm of coming in half a beat beyond or behind their more capable peers. And I don't really worry too much about that, because they tend to start trying. Once they build more confidence and more skill, they'll start trying to come in right alongside it. So don't get too caught up with the idea that you have some kids who are just lagging a little bit behind. Chances are they might still need to do that until they build their skills and build their confidence. So as a quick review, this step, the connected text, takes approximately 15 minutes, so approximately half that day's lesson. And it includes reading sentences, spelling sentences, and then reading a decodable passage or book. So that is our day 2 lesson. And we hope that this explanation has helped you understand each of the lesson steps better. We are going to be doing another webinar soon. We haven't scheduled it yet, but our next webinar will focus on differentiation. So how to use the progress monitoring tools that are built into the manual. So we do have spelling assessment built in so that every lesson has a quick assessment. And then how to use the data from that assessment to plan small group supplemental support for your for the next week's instruction. So that wraps up our content, and I'm guessing that we probably have a few questions. So if we want to take a little bit of time to answer those, I will stop talking.
Thank you. Yes, we have 2 questions. The first question relates to the word work step. One of the teachers wanted to know should teachers aim to do all of the words that are planned in the word work chain?
Yes, I would suggest if possible. So our general recommendation is to try to get through at least 10 of the words that are listed. If you can get through all of them, absolutely try to. So kind of my philosophy was getting through any of these lessons is try to do as many of the examples that are provided on every step as you possibly can, because every one of those is an opportunity for students to respond and practice and get better at the skill. So the more often that they're reading a word or spelling a word or making that grapheme phoneme correspondence, the better they're going to get at that skill. The only way that kids get better is through practice, and there's a ton of practice built into these lessons, but you've got to have a quick perky pace, as we like to say, to get through the steps in a way that you can get all of these in. But if you do have a nice quick pace, and it might take a little while to build students' capacity to do it at that pace, that's fine. If you can't do it, get all the words in at the beginning of the year, but try by Thanksgiving to get as many of those words in as you can.
Awesome. And I venture to think that getting through the entire lesson is the biggest goal, instead of just spending all the time trying to finish one step. It's to get through the whole lesson so they get through all the pieces.
Yeah, when I'm saying get through as many of the words as you can in the amount of time that's devoted to that step. So really try to monitor your time and to stick as closely to the recommended times as you possibly can. If you find that one step is not taking that long, try to maybe look at what's going on in that step, and are students really getting all the practice that they need? Or if one is a step is running over, think about how you can pick up the pace. What kinds of routines do you need to build so that students can get through it quickly? One of the things that we see that does slow down the lessons a lot is when teachers haven't developed really refined routines with their kids. So the lessons require changing materials, put away your dry erase board, get out your magnetic letters, these kinds of things. And so you want to have ways to do that happen quickly. That's probably one of our the webinars that we'll have down the road, is one about just building efficient routines and really supporting kids in getting through the lesson from the behaviors that they need, not just the academic piece of it.
Exactly. Because we always know the first weeks of school, that's what you're basically doing, setting up that classroom community. I love it. And then the last most anticipated question was, everyone just wanted to know again, when and where will the decodable text guide be placed?
All right, so the decodable text guide is going to be on our website on the toolbox. So the toolbox has that kind of reddish orange box that has certain things listed. Within the next day or so, you will see appear on there another line that says decodable text guide, and that's where you'll be able to access that that spreadsheet.
Awesome, because I know teachers are dying to compare what they have and what we have. But
and if you have decodable sets that you would like for us to review, let us know. We're asking publishers who are interested in having their sets included to send us their books so that we can review and align. We're working through these as I speak.
Wonderful. Well, that was all the questions we had tonight. But remember, if you have any other questions, Valentina already put it in the chat. Please go to our Facebook group. That's the best place to put questions and to share and connect with other teachers, because we always love, our best ideas always come from taking them from other teachers and other great minds.
Right. And one of the advantages of posting it there is you don't just get our response, you'll get responses from your colleagues, your peers out there. And sometimes they'll have better answers than we will. And very often they'll have faster answers than we will. So.
Wonderful.
Right. Anything else?
No, that was it.
Well, then thank you all very much for joining us this evening. We appreciate it, and we'll look forward to seeing you at the next webinar.